This episode is brought to you by my fertility awareness programs. Master fertility awareness and improve your menstrual cycle health at the same time. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme for more information. That's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 195. Welcome to the 195th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source of information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I recently created a free 3-part video series all about the fertility awareness method and how you can utilize the fertility awareness method to develop body literacy. So to really connect you with your cycles and really understand what's happening in your body. And so if you haven't had a chance to get your copy of my free video series, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101 to gain access to my 3-part video series all about fertility awareness charting. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. And so in today's podcast, we're going to talk about Aryuveda. One of the areas that we actually focus on quite a bit is the postpartum period. So the importance of being taken care of and really being mindful of how you kind of plan and structure that postpartum time. As a mom, as a mom of 2, I know firsthand how critical that period of time is. It's really tempting to think that, especially if you're pregnant for the first time, and if you're about to be a first-time mom, it's really tempting to think that things will be kind of similar to the way they were before you had kids. And so you can be tempted to kind of like plan a bunch of stuff and think that you'll have time to do laundry and, cook food and everything that you used to do in the way you used to do it. But the postpartum, especially immediately after, it's really important to have people taking care of you, to have someone arranging meals for you and supporting you with the household tasks and things like that. And so that's one of the topics that I really love talking about. So I'm really glad that we address it in today's episode. So at the time of this recording, we've actually just had our very first session in the latest round of my 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery Group program. And I love when we just start. I love this period of time. It's really exciting. All the ladies are getting to know each other, just meeting each other, and just starting to connect with each other in our group sessions and also in the private Facebook group. And it's also a really exciting time because we're really diving into fertility awareness and going deep into the fertile signs. So really going in there and getting down the basics. So this is one of my favorite times in the group program, really kind of diving in and getting all of the questions out of the way. So don't worry if you missed out on this round. You can always head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and jump on the wait list to be notified the next time the program is being offered. And my evergreen programs, my Get Pregnant Naturally program and my natural birth control program are always running. So those are my 4-month one-on-one fertility coaching programs where I provide support to you. It's really tailored to you. So the main difference is that instead of meeting as a group on a regular basis, it's actually just me and you. So we really take a deep dive into your charts. So for more information about my evergreen one-on-one coaching program, or to book a one-time strategy session to really dive into your menstrual cycle charts, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme for more information. Now let's jump into today's episode. And today I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Stacy Claxton, to the show. Stacy is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and an Ayurvedic health practitioner specializing in preconception, pregnancy, and postpartum care. As an educator and a clinician, she believes strongly in the transformative power of diet and lifestyle and desires to inspire wise stewardship in the realm of holistic health. And in today's show, we'll be talking about Aryuveda, and we're also going to be focusing on managing the postpartum period. So 2 topics I'm really excited to jump in. So welcome to the show, Stacy.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm really glad that you reached out to me because as we were just talking about the pre-chat, you are the first Ayurvedic practitioner to be on the show. And so I'm really excited to chat with you about that and learn more about Aryuveda.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so just to get us started, one of my favorite questions to ask my guests is, what drew you into this work? How did you discover Ayurveda?
Yeah, very interesting question, and one I think that has a lot of points that pointed me along this journey. I would say most obviously it was a career anniversary that actually precipitated this switch from a career more in a corporate environment. I was in the publishing world to one that focused on healing, specifically Ayurveda. So I was drawn to the field just by some of my own interests from childhood and young adulthood, experiencing my own health challenges that started to get me to ask questions, conduct a little research, start to seek answers, and endeavor to make my own dietary and lifestyle changes apart from any standard Western medical advice. So there was already an interest there. I would go to the library and take out books about ancient healing and other practices. But the career switch that actually triggered the desire to study Ayurveda came when I was coming up on 6 years in publishing and felt this increasing pull to take a Sabbath year, kind of a personal sabbatical of sorts. And I really enjoyed publishing, but I felt the pull to invest more meaningfully in people's lives, in their health, in their well-being, and to maybe explore more the ways that my own health had been shaped by what I'd learned on the side. And so that's when I decided to take this 180 and start exploring ancient healing, specifically Ayurveda, from a formal standpoint. I really wanted to learn more, and I figured a field of complementary and integrated health presented an opportunity not only to fuel a personal passion of mine, but potentially to craft a more purposeful career than the one that I had been leading in publishing. So that's when I sought out programs to study Ayurvedic medicine, and I continued down that path, gaining the theoretical framework, gaining some clinical experience, eventually to become certified as an Ayurvedic health practitioner, also a yoga instructor, as well as a specialist in perinatal care. But that evolved down the process a little further along my journey.
Well, and I'm curious if you could just give us a window into your previous career, because it sounds like you did make quite a transition from publishing, of all things.
Yes, yes. In a way, it was continuous. As we look back in our journeys, we can see how all the pieces fit together. But I really love publishing. I love working with words and grammar and the precision of editing and typing books. And I love managing big projects and feeling like I'm contributing to the education of people down the line, since we did a lot of resource materials. But at the same time, I felt like there was a desire to invest more in people's day-to-day lives in a sphere that radically transformed what they did with themselves, their families, and their communities. So in a way, it was just one step closer to the personal interaction of people, but still within this realm of education and helping lives transform.
That's really interesting. I love that. The more that I interview, the more that I'm just fascinated with kind of the different paths people take to get to their careers.
Definitely. And there are a few interesting twists and turns in mine, one being getting into more of this fertility space and the mother-baby scene, because when I started studying Ayurveda, I thought I was going to take it in a very different direction. I didn't necessarily have any interest in perinatal at all. I hadn't even heard about the term postpartum care, and that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit here. And now I'm immersed in it. And in fact, to be really honest with you, Lisa, as a young single woman at the time with very little exposure to kids, I really tried my best to shy away from pregnant women at all. So it's kind of funny how the simple human plans that we have in our journey kind of diverge from this grander scheme and often take us to places that we wouldn't have expected, but we also wouldn't trade.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into it. Tell us a little bit about Ayurveda. So I know a very limited amount about Ayurveda, and some of the listeners will have known nothing, and perhaps this is the very first time they're hearing the term. So could you give us the Ayurveda 101 for beginners?
Yes. And that's a question I get a lot because it does seem like a foreign word. And in fact, Ayurveda itself comes from the Sanskrit. And most of us don't have a lot of exposure to Sanskrit as a language, but by definition, it literally means the science of life and longevity. So it is a science, but it's also so much more than a science. It's also an art and a way of life that promotes longevity. It came out of India more than 5,000 years ago, but I really see it as something that transcends time and place. And so even though it's from India, there's so much that's applicable to us today in our culture, regardless of the time. It's actually one of the oldest medical systems in the world. So oftentimes we talk about the Greek physician Hippocrates, for example, who's popularly credited with founding modern medicine, but ancient systems like Ayurveda actually predate that by thousands of years. So it has this long time-honored history to it, but it's also very accessible to the modern person. And that's what I like to emphasize about it, that it is very focused on daily diet and lifestyle choices. And those choices are really guided by each individual's unique mind-body constitutions. So sometimes that sounds like a mouthful, but essentially it means focusing on who you are as an individual physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and using that information and how you're situated and positioned in the world to take diet and lifestyle measures that then help you reclaim your health. And there are lots of practical ways to do that. And on the very simplest level, Ayurveda talks about elements. Perhaps that's familiar to most listeners from ancient Chinese medicine, but if not, they're elements that you probably heard of, elements like air and fire and water and earth and things you see in the environment around you. And then Ayurveda also talks about qualities that we can also understand. So things like hot and cold and heavy and light. Again, things that we see and understand from the world around us. And then what we do in Ayurveda is we take those elements and we take the qualities and we take simple principles and we put them into balance. So just making it really practical and simple, a quality I mentioned just now was cold. So cold is a quality. If you take something that's cold, like a human body that's feeling really chilly, it's winter, whatever, you're outside in the snow, and then you add more cold to it, like you come inside and you drink a glass of ice water or you have a bowl of ice cream, then you create more cold in the body. But if you counter that cold with something hot, so perhaps through ingesting some warming foods and spices or reaching for a warming tea, then you balance the cold in the body. And so on the most fundamental level, Ayurveda as a science and as an art helps people use those daily choices like reaching for the hot tea instead of the iced beverage to help balance what's going on in their body.
And maybe you could share with us, because I think one of the challenges with talking about a medical system is that it's a medical system. I mean, it's broad. It'd be like trying to explain traditional Chinese medicine in like an hour slot when there's so many different applications, just like the applications of modern medicine. But maybe, we can focus on some of the fertility related aspects, and we're definitely going to get into some of the postpartum principles, but maybe share with us, how the principles of Ayurveda can be applied, say, to fertility challenges, or just to kind of make it a little bit more tangible for the listener, how some of these principles can be applied to improve our health.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of it is seasonal, and this is true from seasons of life to seasons represented by fall, winter, spring, and summer, but reaching for foods that are in harmony with the season. So as I mentioned before, if it's a cold season, reaching for warming, heating foods and drinks, or taking actions in the body to build the fire within, so to build the digestion. But related to pregnancy and particularly postpartum, that could be a good example because people are familiar with that when they're thinking about fertility. So for example, when you're thinking about building new life, you want to ingest foods that are nourishing to the body, that build it up. And I know on your show often, one of the things you talk about a lot, Lisa, is fats and the abundance of reasons that we should be using those in building fertility. But one of the reasons from an Ayurvedic standpoint is because that nourishes the tissues. It builds up the body. It creates the lubrication in the space to nourish new life. In a similar vein, if you take another example kind of from the postpartum situation, anyone who has given birth or has experienced someone in their world who's given birth knows that there's this huge physical, emotional, and energetic expenditure that comes with birth. And there's this place that the woman is in as a pregnant woman, and you might have experienced this too, that there's this place of heaviness and fullness and moisture and warmth and everything that comes with carrying another living, breathing body in the womb. And then with the instant of birth, in a matter of moments, you enter this space as a new mom of emptiness where the womb is vacated and with it lots of fluid and energy. And so all that heaviness and fullness and moisture and warmth dissipates, and you're filled with things like light qualities and dry and perhaps even cold or feeling tired and depleted. There's also a lot of volatility in the postpartum period. So you've got these internal fluctuations. You've got lots of physical and hormonal and emotional changes. And so there's a lot of mobility. So then getting it back to the practical example from Ayurveda, Ayurveda says those qualities that are present, we need to counter with qualities that we can provide through food and lifestyle practices. So let's give the new mom heat. Let's give her heaviness. Let's give her moisture and lubrication and grounding and everything that counters all of that change and all of that volatility of being a new mom with a womb that's just been vacated. And so we give her warming, nourishing, soupy, oily type foods, and we wrap her up tightly, and we make sure she's warm, and we make sure she feels supported and calm and grounded. So I don't know if that helps provide an example from the fertility space, especially in postpartum, but those are ways we can look at the qualities of what someone's experiencing and then provide food and lifestyle measures that help them come back into balance by balancing those qualities.
Well, and what I'm really hearing is this kind of theme of balancing the body and making sure so I feel like that's one of the things that I'm getting, and I'm really excited to get into this conversation of postpartum care, because I feel like this is something that's really lacking, a piece of traditional wisdom that just is not applied as much as it needs to be for, the modern day mama.
Absolutely.
Even, when I'm sure you've experienced this in your field working with clients. So when I'm working with clients, either when they're planning to conceive or once they've conceived, I really, make a point of spending a lot of time talking about the importance of preparing the body for pregnancy from a nutritional standpoint, also emotionally preparing yourself to the best of your ability, of course. But
yes.
It's so important to do that because we severely underestimate the incredible task that it is involved in building a human being. And only after you've actually given birth to a baby do you feel that experience for yourself. Like exactly what you described, the shift after birth being empty. I think it's really, I never thought about it that way. So I really like the way that you described that shift. But what I have experienced, the way that I describe it, I always say, and it's like a joke, but it's not. So it's like nothing will steal more nutrients from your body than a baby. Yes. And you will never come out of pregnancy with more in the bank, so to speak, nutrient-wise than you did going in. That's just not a thing. You will never come out better.
Right.
You will always come out with less nutrition than you did before because you just built a tiny human.
Which is incredible.
So let's talk about that and why it's so important for us to have this conversation and actually bring to light the importance of taking care of mom in the process. We're always talking about baby, and that's important, but we also need to talk about mom.
Right. And actually, my focus in the work that I do, even though it's postpartum mother baby, really is mom-centric, not baby-centric. And we tend to have this baby-centric culture, as you mentioned, that's really focused on pregnancy. But the primary protagonist in this whole scenario really is mom. And if we can nourish her well, then she can nourish her baby well, she can take ownership of that primary task, which is mothering her baby. And so it really is the ancient tradition of mothering the mother so the mother can mother her baby. And one thing, too, just to dovetail with what you just said, Lisa, about counseling women before pregnancy and into pregnancy, encouraging them to prepare for postpartum. One of the long-sighted perspectives that I try to offer women is that pregnancy and the anticipation of a child is 9 months. It's a very finite time. But the forever reality of motherhood is that it endures for a lifetime. It's the rest of your life. And the postpartum period, those 6 weeks, those 8 weeks, maybe if you need a little bit more time, is the launching pad for that rest of your life. So it really is the foundation. And like you said, there's a lot nutritionally that can be done to support the mother and to focus on her needs. Like you said, focusing on mothering the mother and letting her then take care of the baby. We can launch into a number of those depending on what you'd like to talk about.
Well, I suppose we could start by, how do you, when you're supporting women, are you typically supporting them before they have the baby? So kind of, while they're still in that pregnancy phase or even before? And if so, what are some of the things that you suggest to the women that you work with to actually prepare before they have the actual baby, before they give birth?
Yes. So planning ahead in preparation is really ideal. And so the perfect scenario would be working with a woman even in preconception, helping her through that foundational period, then into pregnancy, and then helping her prepare for postpartum so that you're walking with her through each season. In Ayurveda, the preconception period coupled with the postpartum period are actually the really essential ones in a childbearing woman's life. We tend to focus on, in our culture, on pregnancy and parenting, but those are both secondary in the ancient traditions. Preconception helps support a healthy pregnancy, and postpartum helps support healthy families and parenting. And so, yes, ideally, it would be helping her prepare ahead of time. Some of that planning is purely logistical, making sure that she has help and support in the weeks after birth so that she can fully devote her attention to taking care of herself and taking care of her baby. So part of the preparation is pinpointing some people to help. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's someone in her community, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's someone who can simply mobilize other people to bring meals or to care for other children if she already has a few children, maybe to do some housekeeping. Whatever it is, there's a huge emphasis on preparing ahead so when the moment comes, the woman can fully surrender to being a mom, being with her newborn, and devoting herself to the primary tasks of nourishing her body so that she can nourish her baby, and also being with together and bonding with her baby. So I will then go into ways to nourish her, specific types of foods, specific meal preparations, herbs, and help her earmark some recipes, help her make a plan for food lists, help her make a plan for any additional supplemental herbs and teas and spices and things she might need on hand. But yes, it is setting the foundation of expectations ahead of time that this is a time for you to rest and to receive. So let's put those pieces in place so that you're able to do that. And then we go into the nitty-gritty of what does postpartum nutrition look like? What do ancient traditional practices for supporting the woman's body after birth look like? And then we get into how to implement those.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's so interesting because having been on both sides of the equation, you go into motherhood like you're pregnant, but your life hasn't really changed when you're pregnant. And so you kind of there'll be a baby there, but you kind of don't necessarily realize like the bomb that goes off after you have a child. Like your time is totally different. So you go from having all this time in your day, essentially like green time, like just time that you can do what you want with, to having much less of that. So you go from having basically like all day where you have the ability to make choices about your time to becoming a mom and having a baby dictate what you're doing for the majority of the day, especially in those early weeks. And so any plans that you might have had or thoughts that you might have had about keeping your house clean or cooking food for yourself or bathing, all of that shifts. And so the importance of preparation, as you mentioned, it cannot be understated. So what I want to ask you now is to touch on some of the traditional practices. So, for those of you who are listening, who have friends of different cultures. So I live in Canada, I have lots of friends of lots of different cultural backgrounds, and I myself am West Indian descent. And so I have friends who still practice certain traditional cultural practices where the mother, after the baby's born, doesn't leave the house for 40 days or whatever it is. Obviously, I don't know the specifics of people in my life. I've seen and heard about practices like that. So I'd love for you to touch on some of the traditional wisdom around what happens then once baby is born.
Right, right. So that is very similar to traditions from Ayurveda. And like you mentioned, it really is global. This idea that the mother gets a period of rest where she's mostly in the home and cared for by other people, usually women. And so in Ayurveda, we actually call this 42 days for 42 years. And so those 6 weeks, those 42 days after birth actually represent one future year in a woman's life. So each day is one future year. So if you let that sink in for a moment, it's quite a long time that each day is representing for your future. So the choices that new moms make and those that surround them to support their rejuvenation in those first 42 days really set the stage for the next 4 decades. So that is a piece of wisdom that is fairly universal, even though the time is a little different. Some cultures have 3 weeks, others have a month. In Ayurveda and other traditions, it's 40 or 42 days. Regardless, there's this sense of a sacred space for the mother immediately after birth to set the tone for the next several decades of her life. And specifically, a slight digression here, but talking about fertility in general, since that's something that's so key to what you share, Lisa, your future fertility as a woman is also predicated on supporting yourself well in the postpartum period. Hormonal imbalances often come up by women who aren't caring for themselves well in that postpartum period. And in fact, that's actually what launched me into the perinatal space to begin with. This is a slight tangent, but could be interesting to listeners, especially if they're in different spheres of life. But when I was studying Ayurveda, I saw lots of women in the student clinic who would come in from the public that were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, much later in life. And when I traced back some of their presenting complaints, which had often warranted lots of surgeries or medications, you could often trace it back to the childbearing years and conditions that had started right after birth that they hadn't cared for themselves well and hadn't taken care of then. And so really that postpartum period is the launching point, like I said, for health or the root cause that can turn into more detrimental conditions down the line. So that is something that's fairly universal, but getting into the details of how to do that, nutrition is a big one. So regardless of what culture you've talked to, likely within that sphere of 42 days or in other cultures a month or 3 weeks, whatever it is, there are usually specific dishes, specific spices, specific foods that are emphasized during that period that might not be emphasized as much during different seasons of life. Mm-hmm. And we can get into some of those foods because it's not only the foods, but it's also how well they're prepared or what types of preparations are used. And I know you talk a lot about ancient traditions as far as using traditional cultures and their food principles to nourish fertility, and a lot of the wisdom that comes out of places like Weston A. Price and his travels, but also those traditions around food cultures and fertility are based on universal tenets. So even if there are different climates and crops and cultures in different parts of the world, different locations, there are certain principles, even if the exact foods and herbs or subtle nuances to the practice might vary. So that's true with postpartum care, even if in the West Indian culture versus Indian versus Chinese versus other South American or Canadian, whatever it may be, the foods might be slightly different, but there's an emphasis on warmth. There's an emphasis on healthy fats. There's an emphasis on lubrication and well-spiced foods, but not overly spiced foods, and high-quality fresh ingredients, and other women cooking consistently so the woman isn't eating frozen foods or leftover foods or poorly prepared foods. So all of those basic principles are fairly global.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's really fascinating to think about this from an ancestral perspective, because they had different language back then, and they had a different level of understanding. So although the information and the practices support, when you actually look at the science, what's fascinating is that now we have different language. Now we have a different paradigm. So now we use science, and we use studies, and we dissect what molecules and what nutrients are in the foods, and really kind of look at a very granular level. But what's interesting is that the science supports it. So now we just have a different language to really describe and understand the same things that they have been doing for thousands of years in a different way. So from a very practical standpoint, and I think it's helpful to really and truly, whenever I talk about postpartum, I always feel the need to interject my own experience, because if I hadn't gone through it, I wouldn't there's tissue damage, regardless of whether you have a vaginal delivery or whether you have a cesarean delivery. There's very practical, logistical things that need to be addressed. So tissue damage, energy depletion, nutrient depletion, those types of things. So let's talk about some of those traditional dietary pieces in Ayurvedic tradition. And so basically, right at that critical moment after birth, those first few weeks, what types of foods are emphasized and why? Absolutely. Critical piece of information there. There is a lot of tissue damage as well as great nutritional needs. A mom is breastfeeding in most cases, and so her caloric needs are increased. But at the same time, when you consider the tissue damage and the other changes that occur in that moment of birth, you probably noticed this too, Lisa, with your births, that things are a little different. Digestion's a little off, elimination is a little off. You don't quite feel yourself. And so you can't just start throwing the most nutrient-dense meal you can think of at a body that just went through hours of intense energy expenditure and has some tissue damage and some other collateral involved. So part of the goal of Ayurvedic postpartum care and other traditions of care is not only providing all those good nutrient-dense foods, but first and foremost, making sure mom can digest them, because the digestive fire goes down, her elimination is off, as I mentioned, and all of those pieces are critical for her to assimilate the nutrition that she's taking in. So specifically, right after birth, in Ayurveda, it's usually a very simple, soupy type meal. So often after birth, women will reach for things that are their favorite foods or something from takeout because they might be in a hospital or a birthing center. But really what a new mom needs after birth is something warm and soupy, not a lot of dense nutrition. So often in traditional cultures, it's something like a big pot of rice that's been cooked for hours and hours, and it has maybe 12 to 16 parts of liquid to 1 part of grain. And maybe it has a little bit of spicing. It has some healthy fats like we talked about, especially ghee. Ghee has been considered a superfood throughout the ages. And for those who aren't familiar with ghee, it's clarified butter. So it comes from butter, but it's been slow cooked in this process that tends to remove the milk proteins. As a result, it tends to be very well tolerated, even for someone with a dairy sensitivity. So ghee is a superfood. So plenty of oiliness from things like ghee or coconut oil, or some traditional cultures use actual animal fat, tallow and lard, and whatever they have in their environment, infused into something liquidy, lots of broth or simple water cooked in a healthy or just energy producing type carbohydrate, whether it's rice or in some cultures it's more like blue cornmeal or whatever the traditional staple is.
And the spices then help the digestion come back online. So that first meal is providing the warmth, it's providing the hydration, it's providing some lubrication, it's providing a little bit of energy, but it's also providing the spices that bring that digestive fire back into action, because that's what's going to allow the woman to start the recovery process, to start the process of making healthy breast milk, and the process of her being able to assimilate the nutrients that she takes in.
Well, and although you mentioned it's like not the most nutrient dense, like high caloric meal, something like broth, slow cooked broth, with joint bones that's gels when you put it in the fridge. So it's got there's a lot of nutrients to be had in that. And when you marry this traditional practice with the literature about glycine and the impact that has on building tissue and supporting healing, it's very, very interesting. And I mean, from a practical standpoint, it's, a good broth or a good soup is like a warm hug on the inside. Like it just tastes, it tastes delicious and it feels good. So it's not just, it's kind of addressing all of these needs. And, when someone makes you a wonderful bowl of soup, it's like love in a bowl. So as silly as that might sound, I feel like it hits all these different points. But from a nutritional standpoint, it's what your body needs to heal faster.
Right. Absolutely. And so, like you said, it is nutrient dense, but not in the way sometimes our modern mind is programmed to look at it. But from an ancient perspective, and even from a constituent perspective, it's full of all those enriching nutrients that is exactly what a new mom's body means or needs right after birth. And I love the words you use there. You're like, it's like a warm hug. And exactly that's the goal of Ayurvedic postpartum care, is to provide this warm embrace on so many levels. So on the physical level, actually providing the warm, safe space, usually the comfort of our own home, but sometimes the comfort of a family, friend, or relative's home. So the safe space where she can feel embraced in a warm embrace, but the food should feel like a warm embrace. Things like soups, things that you just want to put your hands around and drink and sip on, warm teas, but also from a very physical standpoint and lifestyle practices, warm embrace of oil massage and binding the belly, and practices that help her feel contained and nurtured. At the same time, she's then able to wrap her baby in this warm hug and to provide this safe, nurturing space for the baby to acclimate to life outside the womb, which is a huge transition for a little life. So that was a perfect term that you used there. But yes, the food provides the warmth and feels like a nourishing hug. And then from there, so many things fall into place.
Well, and we should talk a little bit about what happens next. But I feel like also you touched on this, but after something like birth, birth is very intense, and afterwards you will be tired, and you don't know how tired you'll feel or how long it'll take you before you feel like yourself again. But you don't necessarily want to have like a 3-course meal after an experience like that. So from a very practical standpoint, if you have this in mind, this is something that you can prepare for. This is something you can plan for. This is something you can organize and arrange if you have people around you that can help to cook meals like this for you. Like you can buy bones to make soup ahead of time. So from a very practical standpoint, knowing that having broth or soup on hand or something warming like this, it will be kind of what you want to go to right after birth. Just having that available to yourself in one way or another. You can even order it online. There's a company called Kettle and Fire, and you could if you live in the States, you could order it and they'll deliver it to your house. So you don't have to cook it yourself if you don't have the ability to do that. But I really like that kind of practical application of it, because really and truly it's like, well, what do I do? So if you have this stuff stocked and prepared somehow, if you make it when you're still big and pregnant and then you freeze it, then when you have the baby, you could just thaw it out, and then you have something for those first couple of days.
Right. And again, from a practical standpoint, things like crock pots are really helpful. So a woman goes into labor. We know the baby's not going to be born immediately. It could be a quick labor, it could be a long labor, but the benefit of having a crock pot is that you could start a soupy dish, and so that it's warm and fresh and ready to go whenever she's ready for it. So there are practical ways that you can have a freshly cooked meal ready for a new mom. And that's a practice then she can take with her into the postpartum period, having a small crock pot of food warming throughout the day and night. And that way she can reach for healthier, nutritious food, freshly cooked food when she wakes at night to nurse, or when she wakes up in the morning and needs to reach for something. And it provides a way for her to prepare in advance to have the nutrition she needs on hand and accessible. So she's reaching for the warm, soupy, lubricating, hydrating things rather than a quick packaged snack.
Mm-hmm. Well, and many a new breastfeeding mom is taken completely aback by how hungry she is all of a sudden with the demands of breastfeeding. So having food available is key. So now we need to nourish the mother. We've talked about warming foods, broth, and before you mentioned, organizing this in advance so that people bring you food. So someone's cooking you food, or you've somehow arranged to at least have food in the house so that you have something to eat, because that's very, very important. So what are some of the other things that we want to do in those first critical few weeks?
Yes, absolutely. And before we get into some other things, I just want to circle back because you mentioned having other people coordinating meals and bring food. And that is an area that I often have women prepare in advance, and not only recommend that friends bring warm, soupy things, but actually even give them ingredient list or say, these are foods that help me recover. And so provide an emphasis on colorful, dense root vegetables, things that are in the ground, beets, carrots, yams, actually provide specific recipes using some of those. Pumpkins and winter squashes are also great choices. We talked about some soupy broths, and that's easy to make in advance and to have around, but also creamy porridges, things that are hydrating, lubricating, provide some healthy fats as well as a good source of protein, some sources of soaked nuts, creamy sauces, iron-rich fruits. So providing them with lists of actual ingredients really seems to make it more tangible. And that way they can say, okay, you want to bring a meal. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Can you use some of these ingredients? Can you use some of these qualities? It'll help my recovery so much better. And often people actually welcome the instructions because then they know exactly what to do and they know how to care for the new mom in the best way.
Well, and you made me think, of course, of a couple of things. So one of the first things is this is your opportunity to ask for things. So make sure to ask.
That's huge. Mm-hmm.
So I'm giving you permission. I'm actually ordering you to ask your friends. So everyone, if you have whoever is in your life, whether it's some really close friends, whether it's some close family members or whatever it is, this is the time to actually make a request and ask, because these are people who love you and they will actually want to do this for you. And to make it even more specific, I have friends who've set up food trains where not just it's random, but it's that people have specific days. So for the first 2 weeks, you organize it such that someone brings you food every day. Yeah, people are willing to do that. So it's something to keep in mind. I think it's really important. And also people are going to want to come and visit, and I'm sure you'll talk a little bit about that and how to organize that. But make it a rule, if you come to visit me, you got to bring me something to eat.
Yes. And you brought up some great points and ones that I often do in preparing a new mom. So one would be, yes, ask for help in any sphere of life. So yes, it's with food, but also with childcare or housekeeping or whatever it may be. Ask for help, make your wishes known. You can do it respectfully. People want to help. They're eager to help. And even people who don't have close friends or family around, sometimes they're hesitant to reach out into their community. But if you get a little resourceful and start asking questions, you'll realize how much people love welcoming new babies into the world. So that is one piece. The other piece is, yes, when someone comes to visit, this is another thing that new moms can prepare themselves for in advance. People love to visit new baby families, but the goal is on mothering the mother. And so she needs to have space for her to feel safe and warm and protected and able to rest. And so if there's too many visitations, sometimes that gets compromised. And so for her, it could be saying what her needs or boundaries are and having a point person, a partner, some other family member enforce that. So friends can come to visit. Maybe they only stay for a short time. They either bring something or they do some errands around the house. So they always provide some sort of service to help her out. At the same time, one little tidbit for new moms or visiting new moms too is to notice when the baby's sleeping and when the baby's awake. If the baby's sleeping, mom probably wants to rest too, so it's probably time to make an exit. So just being really mindful about the needs of a new mom, and also having her be able to keep her space one that supports her well. And often, like I said, that's where a point person, a family member, someone else is often really helpful to create those boundaries with visitors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so much. I mean, I'm guessing that you and I could talk about this topic for hours because there's so much to it. And you always want to tell, it's like you want to tell the new mom everything at a time. You just want it to be like, okay, this is everything you need to know. Do you have 6 hours?
I know. Or longer than that. We could keep going.
I know.
But you asked about some specific practices, so we can launch into that if that's helpful.
Yes.
Maybe some ancient practices that are fairly ubiquitous in different cultures. And one of them is gentle body work. So wherever you go in the world, traditions that have strong cultures of supporting women after birth often incorporate some type of gentle body work. And in the case of Ayurveda, we use warm oil massage. And so that actually means taking some oil, something that you likely have in your pantry on hand. It could be something like warm sesame oil or warm coconut oil, and warming up the oil, finding a comfortable spot to undress, and then rubbing that oil into your skin, starting at the extremities, working it into the tissues, working toward the heart. Ideally, then you follow a massage with some sort of soothing bath. Realistically, for the modern mom, if she doesn't have a lot of help, that's not always feasible. So in which case it could be a little hot shower, minimal soap to retain the residue of the oil, which is very nourishing to the tissues in the same way that internal oils, so taking in dietary fat, is helpful for the body and the nutrition. External oil for the skin is so lubricating. It helps reintegrate the tissues. It helps circulation. It helps mom feel at home in her body again. It strengthens and nourishes and lubricates and provides flexibility. There's so much benefit to oil on the skin. And this gentle practice of massage is critical, like I said, for helping her ground in her body again, helping her reintegrate after birth. And so massage or some other gentle body work practices in ancient healing traditions, especially involving postpartum care, are not seen as pampering at all. Often when I mention massage to modern women, they're like, oh, wow, that sounds so blissful, but I couldn't possibly do that. But actually, there's some truth to making it happen and believing that you should make it happen, that it's actually critical to your recovery in those first few weeks. So in ancient cultures, often women handed down the practice of massaging the new mom. And so they knew that an older woman would do it for a younger woman in her midst. We don't have quite as much of that as anymore, and we don't have as many people who are trained specifically in postpartum massage. And so that's why even if someone doesn't have a person in their midst who could provide massage to her, I'll teach the self-massage, like I mentioned, where you simply use an oil that you have in your home, usually sesame, maybe coconut, but coconut's a little more cooling. The traditional oil is more sesame-based since it's very lubricating, very thick and warming. And she can just take a few minutes in the comfort of her bathroom when maybe a partner, a friend, a family member is with the baby, if the baby's sleeping, and take a few moments of self-care to rub some oil into her skin and then to have a warm bath or a hot shower to help that integrate. And simple practices like that, especially if done gently and consistently day after day throughout the postpartum period, can work wonders on a woman's recovery.
And is that just like massage, like back muscles, arms, legs? Like, is it just kind of body massage as you typically think about it?
It could be. So traditionally, it pretty much covers most parts of the body being sensitive to any areas since she just gave birth. And so if someone is trained in postpartum care and they're providing it for a new mother, they'll do the farthest extremities, the toes and the feet, and really spend some time on the feet. They'll work up the legs. They'll do the hands and the fingers and the arms. They'll also even do the scalp, really getting into the scalp and the ears. Ears especially can be beneficial for new moms. And there are lots of specific marma points, which are similar to acupressure points, if anyone's familiar with acupuncture or Chinese medicine. But there's so many different points on the ears that this active massage isn't just soothing and gentle, but it actually touches parts of the body that create energetic connections from organs to tissue systems to promote healing and reintegration. So massage covers a lot more than meets the surface, no pun intended there. But it really is a very thorough, comprehensive practice that can cover head to toe. Naturally, we want to be gentle around the belly area if a mom has any discomfort, or especially if she had a surgical birth, you need to be mindful of that area and maybe leave it aside. You also don't want a new mom to lay on her stomach. So if you are providing massage for someone, having her on her side and getting the back that way is the best way to do it. So there are some modifications that are made, but in general, it is like giving mom a massage that you might experience in the spa, except it's certainly not deep tissue. It's not vigorous. It's gentle. It's mindful. It's done with that warm, nourishing oil, and it's done with a gentle touch. And that's often why women did this for other women, because a woman's touch imparts a different energy. And so it's something that was passed down in a lineage, and it provides and it imparts that maternal touch to help mother the mother again, so that she can then mother her baby. So there are a lot of ways to do that, a lot of different practices of massage, but essentially, yes, it can be head to toe, being mindful of sensitive areas, and definitely also doing the breast area to help keep the flow going for breastfeeding. So making sure that tissue is massaged and moving smoothly, that there isn't any stagnation there. So that's another area that the mother can actually massage herself if she feels comfortable and is doing her own massage to promote her ability to nourish her baby well.
I think just the concept of pampering a new mom, it's so interesting how that would seem novel, right? Whereas like there was a time when chivalry was actually a thing, and there's a reason for that. And so if this is kind of seems strange or seems indulgent, I feel, we have to take a pause with that and think that, without women having menstrual cycles, without women ovulating, without women getting pregnant, carrying babies, delivering, there would be no generation. There would be no next generation. So let's just take a pause and not think this is indulgent, please.
Right. So, and a lot of, and we've touched on this theme, so I might as well just be explicit with it throughout many of the different areas, but it's a real paradigm shift, reframing our orientation about what it means to be a new mom, what it means after birth. We're so focused on pregnancy and then birth that we think a woman needs to bounce back and she needs to be full of energy and manage her household and take ownership of things and figure out how to raise a child and do all of that. And our world tends to glamorize that busy, that high energy, do it all supermom who's quickly back at work or the gym or church or activities or wherever the case may be. But it really takes a paradigm shift to challenge the women I work with and those that I work with more on an educational front to re-envision what it looks like to be a supermom in those 6 weeks after birth. It's not a time to bounce back. It's not even about bouncing back, because truth be told, new women after birth will never be the woman they were. They passed through this really incredible rite of passage and emerged powerfully on the other side. So it isn't so much about bouncing back and recovering and feeling like the same person that you were. It's about resting, receiving, and then launching into a new sphere of life, this journey into motherhood, this new role in the community, in the family, in the home. And a lot of that takes help. It takes receiving. It takes shifting the expectations around the baby's needs, which will be all-consuming. Babies are 100% dependent and needy, and that's a beautiful, glorious thing. And so taking the time and the space and the energetic and emotional understanding to relish that and to savor that and to spend time with the baby and to accept help, to accept receiving, to accept things like massage, and not to see it as indulgent, but to see it as a beautiful way the human being has been designed to recover, to be at one with others in their community, both through receiving healthy touch, receiving healthy nutrition, and then giving healthy touch and giving healthy nutrition to the next generation.
Well, and, I would like to end on this topic of rest. You basically brought in this topic beautifully, because this is my next kind of where my mind was going here. But ultimately, Stacy, I feel like this topic we could talk about for a whole podcast, and maybe we should. But so what I'd like to end on today is what you touched on, the concept of rest. As someone who's been through birth twice, just the societal BS idea that we're supposed to get our quote unquote bodies back and be 100% like our pre-pregnancy body within 6 weeks, 10 weeks, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'd just like to touch on that. But again, like that could be a topic of a whole podcast, and maybe it should, because not only is it, I have a couple schools of thought from my own perspective, and I want to hear what you think. So one of the schools of thought I have is that when you take care of yourself and you're eating nourishing foods and you're getting the rest that you need, you don't really have to try to get the weight off. But that's not everyone's experience. But I know many, 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 many women who didn't have to quote unquote try or do things to get their quote unquote body back. Just by being healthy, by taking the rest that they needed, they were able to kind of get there without having to force it. However, I live in Canada. We have a 1-year maternity leave. It's like a different situation. So there's no expectation for me to look the way I looked until, like, if I'm going back to work, I'm going back to work a year from now. So there's no pressure. The second thing is that you could damage yourself seriously by trying to exercise early on. And I don't know if anyone realizes that, but you could actually seriously damage yourself. I know for myself, although I was healed and I was good and I was in good health and I was able to kind of move around and all of that, I didn't fully feel like I was like healed, like deep muscle healing happened until maybe like the 8 or 9 month mark, the 1 year mark. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And Lisa, you raise critical points, and ones that I also try to bring in with postpartum planning and education to put the expectation out there for new moms, especially in the first 6 weeks and even beyond. There isn't exercise in my protocol. And I'm very much a well-rounded practitioner as far as movement and diet and rest and stress reduction. We do so many different aspects of diet and lifestyle intervention with most of my clients and most of the people I work with. But exercise after birth is off limits. This isn't a time where you're going back to the gym. You're not really even going for walks around the block immediately after birth. That's why we have this sacred space in the ancient traditions where a new mom really is at home resting for much of the time. And like you said, Lisa, you actually can damage yourself when you're still bleeding, especially after birth. That's not a time to do anything vigorous or to stress the body out any further. the body's doing so much just trying to recover and nourish a new body or a new little life there, that exercise could be detrimental. It'll slow the healing process. And like you said, it could actually harm it entirely. So you're right. Exercise is off limits. That's where gentle body work is often key, because the thing we don't realize is that things like massage are actually a passive form of exercise. They move the lymphatic tissue, they help circulation, they move the muscles. And so there's a gentle stimulation of some of those systems that exercise also activates, but it's done so much more safely. So the mom starts to reintegrate into her body. Those systems are brought back in line, but she's not doing anything that's going to tax her body. Often we'll see some postpartum ailments start to surface. Things like mastitis, for example, often comes out when a woman is doing too much, not only exercise, but just too many responsibilities. Some of these conditions of depression and anxiety, and some of the things that are a little bit becoming more common parlance in our culture just by their prevalence, are at their root doing too much after birth and not recovering properly. So you're absolutely right. Exercise is off limits. Do things that are gentle. You can do deep breathing. You can do massage. You can do other ways of integrating the body again, but nothing jarring, nothing extreme, nothing vigorous. And then, as you mentioned just before that comment, Lisa, about the baby weight and letting it come off naturally. Absolutely. That's a key to Ayurveda. When you're balancing things properly, when you're bringing the body system into its own state of harmony, it naturally does what it needs to do to come back into balance. And so when you're eating plenty of that healthy fat, the fat your body doesn't need will come off. It seems antithetical based on our very scientific knowledge and the fact that we use the same word for two very different things. Dietary fat and adipose tissue are two very different things. But doing the right thing to support your body then lets it do the right thing to come back into balance. And so not focusing on baby weight at all, not focusing on bouncing back and looking a certain way or fitting into a certain wardrobe, but simply giving yourself the nourishment it needs and the space to rest can help that process of reintegration, recovery, and balance just happen naturally.
Well, I love that so much. And the challenge is, there's so many societal challenges for women to
absolutely
look a certain way, be a certain way, play all these roles, and also this weird perfection thing that not only did you just build and birth a tiny human being, so just have to keep saying that because it's a big deal, but now you also have to continue to look a certain way and be a certain way. And so just giving you that an alternative perspective, which is that you're at this stage, you're a mom now, and you never will be the same as you were before. It might sound kind of harsh, but when you said that, Stacy, it's true. You transform. It's kind of like, I'm reading a lot of kids' stories to my kids, so often the examples I have, from like the hungry caterpillar, but it's literally like the caterpillar turns into a butterfly. Like the butterfly will never be a caterpillar again, and that's the same idea that we're getting at here. So we've talked about so many different topics, and I know I could just talk to you for the whole day. What is something, Stacy, that you really want to leave the listener with, or kind of that one thing takeaway that you want to make sure our listeners take from our conversation today?
Yeah, and there is so much here, but if I could whittle it down maybe into perhaps one piece of advice for the newer expecting moms, and then maybe one piece of advice for moms in other seasons or women in other seasons, because are two very different demographics. So maybe for any newer expecting moms, really take that sacred time out in the weeks after birth. It's not optional. It shouldn't be an afterthought. You shouldn't feel guilty or indulgent. This is the most powerful thing you can do, nourishing and resting well, so that you can breastfeed and bond with your baby and set yourself, your baby, and your family up for future success. So that's really the powerful advice I would leave for the younger, the new moms, or the expecting moms. And really, we've talked about the intersection of antiquity and ancestral wisdom with scientific research, but that's true here 2. So the most important thing for infants, for their growth and for their development, for their brain function, emotional well-being, and so much, is that secure, attached relationships in the context of having their physical needs met. And a new mom who's properly tended, who's properly nourished in those first few weeks is really the best and the simplest and most natural way to make that happen. And that's kind of the secure foundation for the resilience of the family, but also the culture at large. So that's my strong encouragement to new women or new moms. Make it happen, prepare for it, ask for help. The sacred time out after birth is so essential, and you won't regret that time with your baby. And the second piece, I guess, looking at another demographic for those who don't have new kids or babies in their midst, maybe focusing on the younger mothers in your midst to the extent that you can. And this is where I'd love to see our culture get back to some of those beautiful intergenerational organic practices that we see in some traditional practices, the ritual and routines that are passed on from mother to daughter and down the line. In this culture, we tend to be a little busier, more focused on nuclear families, but we can help recreate the community that values and encourages a woman's transition to motherhood. And we all play a role in that, whether we have children right now or whether we have new babies in our world or not. We all play a role in bringing back into favor that lost art, really, of mothering the new mother, of recreating that sacred space for her and for one another. And it's not easy, certainly, but it really is worth it because, as I've said multiple times, it's really the foundation for the future, not only for that particular mom, but also our communal future as creating a collective of multi-generational empowered women with shared responsibilities. And so I think that would be the second piece of my advice, or what I want to leave with listeners, that this is a role that we can all take on, and that ultimately, as a result, we can have more empowering, more peaceful, more impactful postpartum periods that impact the next generation in such a profound and powerful way.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an amazing note to end on. Stacy, thank you so much for being here today. Like I said, I could just stay in this conversation with you for the rest of the day. For the listeners that want to learn more about you and your programs, where can they go to find you?
Sure. So online, I'm at it's preparingtoparent.com. And that's where I have resources. I blog consistently. I have a little bit more about the work that I do with women one-on-one. My sister and I do complementary services. I work a lot with the physical, some mental, emotional, but she also really dives into mental, emotional, spiritual, and social integration, recovery, preparation, and expectations, especially for new moms. But we also work with women in other seasons of life. So you can find more about us, more about my work, more about our mission, more at preparingtoparent.com. And stay in touch with us. We love reaching out to women and understanding parts of their journey and help empower them wherever they may be on that continuum, from no kids to some kids to wanting kids to preconception to postpartum, whatever it may be.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here, Stacy. It was really a pleasure chatting with you today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Lisa. Thank you so much as well.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/195. I hope that you enjoyed my episode with Stacy. It was, as you could tell, Stacy and I could have talked about postpartum care for the rest of the day. And so I think it's so important. This is one of the topics that I feel just needs to get out there more. And I'm so passionate about bringing it to women because it's so, so, so important to think about the care of mom throughout pregnancy, even before you get pregnant, in the preconception phase, throughout pregnancy, and especially postpartum. I cannot stress enough how critical those first few weeks are after a baby is born. How both emotionally and physically exhausting the process of birth, and then the process of
becoming a mom and having a new baby to take care of. And it's an amazing, wonderful experience. But at the very same time, amidst the wonder and the amazing parts of that experience, can be an incredibly challenging and taxing experience for the mom if she doesn't have the correct support. And it makes it harder to actually savor those moments if you don't have the right support. So you really want to think about what Stacy was talking about in our interview, which is the importance of really focusing on supporting mom throughout the whole process, and especially after birth. Because ultimately, the theme, the takeaway that I really took from our interview is that if you really, really want to support that baby, what you need to do is support the mom. And when you support the mom, then the mom is able to take care of baby. So when mom is fed nourishing foods, when mom is taken care of, when mom can just focus on being mom, especially because it just happened, because we're talking about the first, few days after baby arrives, the first few weeks, it's all new to both baby and mom. Even breastfeeding is a great example of that. For a first-time mom, not only does she not know how to do it, but the baby doesn't know either. So we need to give mom and baby time to bond, and mom time to get her footing in this new adventure that she's in. And so, the best way to support the baby is to focus on supporting the mom so that she has lots of energy, lots of support, lots of nourishment, very little worry about having to hold things together, keep the house together, all that kind of stuff. In the best case scenario, she would be supported in all of those ways so that she can focus on baby. And it's not only important for her physical health in terms of her ability to heal. So whether it's a vaginal delivery that she had or whether it's a cesarean, in both scenarios, mom has just gone through a significant physical event that is traumatic to the body. Trauma meaning that there's tissue damage and, ligament pulling and stretching and all that kind of stuff going on. And so from a physical standpoint, mom needs that support just to heal and recover. But from an emotional standpoint, an amazing, incredibly just a life-changing event has just taken place. And I think it's really important to actually hold space for that and to just sit with that for a moment and think about that. 1 minute the baby wasn't, out, and the next moment you have another human being in the world and you're responsible for taking care of that little baby. And so everything changes in that moment. And it's just so critical to focus that attention on mom and what mom needs. Because once her needs are taken care of, then she's free to focus on taking care of her baby, because she knows, she'll figure it out. She knows what to do. So I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. This is one of the topics that I love talking about, and I was really excited to share it with you. So yeah, thank you for being here and for being part of this conversation. And so if you're not part of the Fertility Friday community yet, I would encourage you to head over to fertilityfriday.com/community. So now that this episode is live, I will post a post in there, and just to get your sense for those of you in the group who have had children of your own, or if you've, supported friends or family members after baby was born, what are some of the things that you did to make it easier for the new mom? Or if you're a new mom yourself, or if you've had a couple of babies, what were some of the things that you really appreciated that friends and family and support persons in your life did for you? Or if your experience, was a little bit less than ideal, what are some of the things that you wish that you would have done? These are the conversations that really help and support women so that they can prepare for when they have that experience for themselves. So yes, thank you for being with us here today and sharing this conversation. If you haven't had a chance to grab your free copy of my 3-part video series all about fertility awareness, then make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam101. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to hang out with me today, for listening to the show and supporting the show. I really appreciate all of you for being part of the Fertility Friday community and for continuing to spread the word, to share the knowledge and information about fertility awareness,
to tell your friends, your colleagues, your family members, to really shout it from the rooftops, because of course every woman has the right to know exactly how her body and her fertility works. And, no one else is going to do it. So it's really up to us to get the word out, to spread the message so that, all women can be empowered with this very basic knowledge of their body that for some reason we just didn't get. So I really appreciate all of you for being part of the community and for helping me to share this knowledge and continue to spread the word. If you're ready to dive in and learn fertility awareness, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me. There's a lot of different ways that we can work together, especially if you're ready to dive in and master fertility awareness. This is what I do. It's my superpower. And so for more information, just head over to fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me. And if you have questions about which program would actually be the best fit, you can always set up a complimentary 15-minute consult with me, and we can go over the different programs and figure out which would be the best fit for you. And so with that said, thank you so much for listening today. I hope you have an amazing week or weekend, depending on when you're listening to the show. And until next time, be well and happy charting.